Hello, my name is Jeremy Sims, and I really enjoy teaching the Bible. I specifically like kind of looking closely at the Bible, finding things I've never seen before, and sharing with other people. So this is my attempt to share it with other people, and I hope you enjoy it. If you like seeing new things, good chance you'll find something new here, because most people don't look at the book of Jeremiah very closely. So this has been an ongoing series I've been doing as I've been teaching through the Bible. I've been doing a short version, a long version of every section. I've already done a short version for this section, so if you want something kind of short and sweet to get the basic ideas of the passage, that's there for you. If you want something in more detail that's kind of break down, get a lot of nuance out of the passage, then that's what I'm trying to do here. I was originally planning on doing this as a single-parter, and I realized there's so much that speaks to me in this particular section. I actually ended up doing like, I think, nearly an hour and a half just on the first 6 verses, so I break it into a two-parter. We're going to move on. This second part might go a little more quickly, but let's go ahead and catch you up. So, Book of Jeremiah in general, this is about 350 years after the time of David, and Judah was in a state of really, it was just a bad state. They were going after false gods. They were not following after the Lord. And Jeremiah was called to bring judgment upon them, not to bring it on personally, but proclaim, hey, judgment's coming. And he kind of knew from the beginning, to a certain extent, it seems, that they weren't going to repent. So it's a very hard thing for Jeremiah. What we looked at specifically last time, which for me was literally just a couple minutes ago, because I just decided I need to split this 13-verse video into a 6-verse video and to do another one. But what we just talked about last time is we really see God saying, hey, I'm looking for just a single man to act right. Like, go through all of Jerusalem, all the capital, get me one single man who is seeking justice and truth, and I'll spare him. I would gladly spare the city. It's like his heart is longing for it. He's like, just give me one. See that in verses 1 through 3, verses 4 through 5. He says, Jeremiah goes through and he's going through all the people and he's like, I can't find anybody. I can't find a good person. And at first he says, he's going through people and he's like, well, you know what? I've just been going to the poor people, and poor people don't know anything. It's kind of the attitude he takes. And he says, instead I'm going to go to the great. But he says, well, even I go to the great, and they had all alike gotten away from God. They weren't following him. He uses the metaphor of like an ox that was supposed to be pulling a plow but had burst the bonds, had burst free and was not serving God. And it seems to be maybe an insinuation that the rich didn't, that they maybe did know more about how they should be serving God, but they still weren't doing it. So finally, last verse we looked at says, therefore a lion's going to come from the forest. It's going to strike them down. A wolf from the desert, a leper watching their cities, going to consume anybody who steps out because of their transgressions, because of their apostasies of giving up their faith. Judgment is coming personified in these animals, not literal animals coming to eat people, I don't think. It was literally going to be the Babylonian Empire coming to bring judgment to the land of Judah. But yeah, so that's where we left, and I guess we'll go ahead and start off with verse 7. How can I pardon you? Your children have forsaken me. They have sworn by those who are no gods. When I fed them to the full, they committed adultery and trooped the houses of whores. They were well-fed lusty stallions, each neighing for his neighbor's wife. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord? And shall I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? Go up through her vine rows and destroy, but make not a full end. Strip away her branches, for they are not the Lord's. For the house of Israel and the house of Judah have been utterly treacherous to me, declares the Lord. They have spoken falsely of the Lord. They have said, he will do nothing. No disaster will come upon us. Nor shall we see the sword of famine. The prophets will become wind. The word is not in them. Thus shall it be done to them. Now look at this. I'm like, can I go on for this nearly as long as I did the last one? This might be short, because I don't feel like I have as much to say about this section, but we'll see. So let's read that first section again. We'll go from there. How can I pardon you? Your children have forsaken me. They have sworn by those who are no gods. When I fed them to the full, they committed adultery and trooped the houses of whores. They were well-fed lusty stallions, each neighing for his neighbor's wife. Shall I not punish them for these things, declares the Lord, and shall I not avenge myself on a nation such as this? So, I should have given you guys a little tease, but I see a lot of things in this passage really paralleling where we are in the United States. If you go back to the last section of what I just got done with, there's a lot to discuss there, and I pointed a lot out as we went, and that continues here. So how can I pardon you? We see that God has still this heart of compassion of just like, give me an excuse to pardon you. I want it. In the last section, he talked about, just give me one person who seeks judgment, justice, and righteousness, who wants to tell the truth. Give me one. And he's still saying, how can I pardon you? Is breaking, I take it, this is inferring emotions on him, but I take it as it's breaking his heart. He doesn't want to see this happen. We saw at the end of chapter 4, the same thing of just, he was mourning the judgment that was coming to them. Which, as a parent, you may have been in that situation yourself. I usually, honestly, don't get as upset as most parents seem to. There's that whole, this hurts me more than it hurts you. I'm usually able to kind of understand, okay, this is something that my child needs, and they're going to be okay. It's not going to hurt them. But there have been times, especially, there are times that you can tell it's really breaking the heart of your child for whatever reason to have discipline a little bit more than usual, and that does sometimes get to me. And for my daughter, she's been going through a little bit of a phase here recently. I hope it's a phase. And yeah, you're like, I don't want to do this, but I have to. It's my duty. So yeah, I think we really see just a heart of God kind of longing for a way not to have to bring judgment on them. How can I pardon you? Your children have forsaken me. They have sworn by those who are no gods. So we talked about before how they were swearing falsely using God's name, but also they're swearing by other gods. They're pledging themselves. They're taking oaths in the names of other gods, which is a very serious thing. That you're committing yourself to the gods as you're doing that, it seems. We had discussion of what oaths mean and me trying to understand it. I think I have a partial grip on it, but not totally. If you want some more discussion on that, look in the last one. Swearing by those that are no gods. When I fed them to the full, they committed adultery and trooped to the houses of whores. So, look what they're talking about here. He's saying some specific things you can skip over pretty easily. When I fed them to the full, not just randomly they did this, it was when I fed them to the full. He's saying, I took care of you guys. I provided for you. You had everything you needed. And what did you do? You committed adultery. Now, God's been using this analogy of adultery over and over and over again, of Judah as being an unfaithful bride to him, a whore. He also switches to the metaphor of daughter a lot of times. And, last chapter we saw at the end of that of talking about when the enemies were coming from them, they were acting like whores towards them to try to curry their favor, even though those people had come for their lives. We see all this, and by the way, Jeremiah uses all these individual word pictures. Sometimes he uses daughter, sometimes he uses wives, sometimes he uses animals. He uses lots of little visual metaphors, and you kind of have to decipher each one. He switches between them real quick, which in my opinion makes them interesting, but it also makes it kind of hard to follow sometimes. So anyway, it says, when I fed them to the full, they committed adultery. So he's talking about probably spiritual adultery is what this is talking about, following other gods. But it seems to go even further in this particular section. They trooped to the houses of whores. So again, a little hint we'll point out when we get there, but I think it's actually talking about more literal adultery here. Either way, this troop to the houses of whores, again, probably a literal thing, but the use of the word trooped there is pretty interesting. Troop to the houses of whores. There's actually an association between soldiers and whores, unfortunately, and maybe not the most fun association there, but that is something you'll hear occasionally. But I think there's more deeper things than just that. I suspect probably the association was there in ancient times too. But more deeply than that, we think of this being like a mass thing. If you're trooping, you're a big group of people, right, that are going to the horse. So this is like a group movement. But I think there's even something more to this, because if you think of troops, it's soldiers, it's organization. Like if you're trooping somewhere, you're going there as a unit. You're going there together under direction, under authority in a way of I think some of these associations are intentionally there. It's not, and I think Jeremiah is saying this isn't just random people choosing to sin. It's not just individuals. It's like there's an organized choice that society is pushing people this way. This is an organized movement towards whoredom, which it was. They were, their gods. Many of them would have. It was very common to have acts of worship of going to of committing, orgies, of having orgies, especially fertility gods. That was specifically, hey, here's something to show you what fertility is. Let's have some sex. And if you're wanting some more on that, I think the first section of chapter 2, the lesson I did on that, breaks down who exactly Baal was, who is a god of fertility. If you're interested in that, look that up. In fact, I think the thumbnail used for it says who was Baal. So yeah, how can I pardon you? Your children have forsaken me. They have sworn by those that are no gods. When I fed them to the full, they committed adultery. So they had everything they needed, and by the way, they committed adultery. Is almost passed up, but this isn't just having lots of sex. This is having sex with other people's spouses, right? Or cheating on your own spouse. So he's saying you had everything you needed, and you went to something else that you didn't need, that you weren't supposed to touch. And troop to the houses of whores. Let's see, do I have anything else in my notes for this? Yeah, and I guess just the idea that, God can't ignore these things. Oh, and tying into the United States, I don't think this is much of a reach, right? Just this morning I was trying to watch a video, some movie I'd heard good things about. Is it Drive? I don't remember what it was. It's that, I don't know, some driving movie that was popped up on Netflix. I'm like, oh, I've heard this is a really good movie. A lot of people had recommended it, and I was like, well, this might be a fun thing to watch for a few minutes while I'm, while I was actually feeding my daughter and my baby daughter. And first thing, like within 3 minutes, it was some nudie sex scenes, and I'm like, oh, I could not watch this. This is not things I need in my head. Anyway, point is, it's everywhere in our society, and it's not subtle. I mean, I start to say half the country, because the left wing is very much into, sexual liberation, sexual lust, and but really that's not just a left wing value. That's very much a conservative thing too. The left wing is worse in terms of just anything and everything. They have a large cultural movement towards it, but it's not like on the conservative side of things, which I definitely have my issues with conservatives. So don't think I'm trying to be all defending them. But even on them, this is a value that's just about dead in our society. Heck, in church, it's practically dead. That you don't find. There are many churches that have stopped talking about these sorts of things, and stop holding people to account on these issues. So, it's really a sad thing. And if you look, I wish I'd taken some time to look up some stats. I didn't, but I mean, you can find in society and in the church, pornography is certainly in society, it's the rule, not the exception. I suspect if I had to take a guess, I'd say in church it's probably pretty close to the rule, not the exception. It's very common sin. And it's something, again, the reason I was mentioning, got kind of political with it, is it's something that's being actively promoted by society of this is the way to live, to fulfill your lust. And, it's a problem. I think this definitely speaks deeply to our society. Moving on. They were well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for his neighbor's wife. That's such a funny way to put it. I love it in small group when people think things are funny that I think are funny too. They were well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for his neighbor's wife. So many things to talk about here. So this is something that makes it pretty indicative that we're not talking about just spiritual adultery, because each neighing for his neighbor's wife, going to the houses of whores, but especially neighboring his neighbor's wife, this doesn't really make any sense in relation to God and spiritual adultery, right? So this seems to be talking about actual, regular, good old-fashioned adultery. That seems to be what's being discussed here. A weird metaphor, right? With this funny thing of well-fed, lusty stallions. Why? Why? Why that metaphor? I didn't quite figure it out completely. But just so you know, so lusty, you get a bunch of different translations for this word lusty. Different translations will do it that they were in that they translate lusty as in the morning stallions. Stallions going about in the morning. They roaming stallions is another translation. Eager stallions. So there's several different translations on this. Apparently, most literally, it means to roam. But yeah, so I guess I'm using the ESV here, and I guess the translators for the ESV thought that roaming, the association was it was suggesting more of a lusty sort of take. But yeah, apparently most literally means to roam and like maybe through lust and or also has association of in the morning. I don't know how it gets there. Whatever. So yeah, well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing for his neighbor's wife. So it's kind of an interesting idea of they were well-fed, like they were taken care of, and then they went roaming. They had what they needed, and then they went roaming anyway. They went out of lust, trying to find their neighbor's wife. Just kind of extends that idea further. So this whole time, every time God ever talked about adultery, he seemed to be talking in spiritual sense. Though again, the spiritual sense often coincided with physical adultery, with them worshiping the gods that way. It's very common for priests and priestesses of false religions to engage in sexual acts as part of worship, which you can see how they're so popular. But why do we switch now to more direct physical adultery from the spiritual adultery talked about before? Well, I think there's, and again, adultery means you're betraying some way too, right? You made a commitment, a bond of marriage, and then you're breaking that. So why? Well, I think there's a lesson to be learned here that if you're breaking your appropriate relationship with God, then that's going to get into your other relationships, right? You're not going to be able to have good relationships with your spouse, your wife. Your respect for your common man is going to suffer if you're not having the proper relationship with God. So I think that's a lesson that can be learned here. What else? Almost closed my window. That would be unfortunate. I guess this is something worth reading. This is from BibleStudy.org. Some idea of why particular this metaphor was chosen. I don't know if this is correct. But here it says, adulterers are compared to horses because they are very salacious and lustful creatures. I didn't know that. Did you know horses were lustful and salacious creatures? Apparently they are. I don't know. I will say on this note, well, we'll come back to that. Wherefore the Septuagint renders the word, these are some different ancient translations, horses are become mad after the females. That's how the Septuagint does it, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Or, as horses mad after the females are they become. The Targum, which is kind of like an ancient commentary on the Bible, calls them field or wood horses, horses that run in the fields and woods and are very vicious and wanton. Is that vicious? Vicious? I don't know that word. Neighing is a sign of lust. I also didn't know that, and I couldn't find anybody confirming that. Is every time a horse neighs, is that like a I guess we do kind of have that as a joke, don't we? Maybe there's something there. I don't know. Horses hang around with their own barn until they are fed. This is speaking of the man as if he were a wild stallion that would jump the fence and go to another's place. I do think that association makes a lot of sense. Until a person is taken care of for their need to eat, they have very little time and energy to go to the neighbor's wife and commit sin with her. Might be something to that as well. And again, it's this idea of God provided what they needed, and they, rather than using the energy and satisfaction of what God had given them, they went to find something else. I think there probably is something there. I think that's the idea of well-fed. And I think that's something to keep an eye on us, because again, the United States, we are so well-fed, quite literally, to the point that we're fat, mostly. But yeah, we're very well-fed, very well taken care of, and are we using all our resources and all that time and all the wonderful things we've gotten to follow after God? or to follow after a lust? And I think we know the answer to that question. Again, we see this people are being pictured as animals. And I don't think that's, this is animalistic action, just fulfilling your lust. Just this is unrestrained lust, which are how animals act. But now this is how people are acting. And here's something to think about, again, for our own culture. This is what people are teaching as if it's wisdom in our culture. The only rule for engaging in sexual culture or in sex, what we're being taught by our culture is it has to be consensual, which, yes, that is an important rule. Rape is bad. Okay, you got one. Good job, society, I guess. But that's the only rule. And everything else is, don't, the stupid phrase, I don't know if you've heard this, but don't yuck my yum. If I like it, then don't tell me not to. And this is just what blows my mind if you actually think about this way. And think about this way. Please put this in your brain and consider it for a while. And also file it away to use the next time you hear somebody spouting some modern sexual ethics. But realize that everything people are saying about sex these days, it's just hedonism. They're literally saying, and this is what they believe is profound wisdom, and this is mildly graphic, but I'm assuming you people are adults. This is for adults, or at least people who have enough maturity to hear mild sexual content. They are saying that all they are teaching, all they are saying is that if you really want to rub your genitals on something, then rub your genitals on something. And that's like the highest standard of sexual morality in our society. There's no other rules. There's no other wisdom. It's as if they think they've gone, wow, if you want to have sex with something, it's great to have sex with it. And they're like, I'm so smart now. I'm enlightened. No, that is the most petty, shallow, insignificant thought. It's beyond juvenile level of immaturity. That, even if it were true, it's not like you're enlightened that this is some deep thought. It's very obvious and silly. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's just such a shallow way of thinking about the world, that this is the highest good is to have sex with whatever you want to have sex with. It's not smart. It's not deep. It's dumb. So yeah, I think we should have sexual restraint. We can see this in lots of different ways, but just and if I sound like I'm being silly or ridiculous, which probably nobody watching this is going to think it's silly or ridiculous, but to a secular mindset, they might say, oh, that's not what I'm talking about. Well, literally you'll find people talking about having affairs, completely running relationships with people that they supposedly love and have commitments to. And then talking about, how wonderful it is because they love people. They love the person that they are now having sex with, as if this justifies it. That's so petty. It's so silly. It's so immature. There's somebody who lives locally where I live, who has a sexual and romantic relationship with his car. You can see it on, Strange Addictions, or Strange, I can't remember, one of those types of shows. And when he goes to see his therapist at the end, they talk about, how wonderful that is and how it's fine. Some people want to have sex with cars, whatever. There was a story just the other day about a woman who pretends to be a puppy for a pornographic website, and this whole, there was this puff piece on it where they were playing this happy music. Oh, this woman thinks she's a puppy, and I don't know if she actually does sexual acts or she was on OnlyFans, which is a pornographic website. I did not look it up any further to see the details. I would be mildly surprised if she doesn't have sex, but regardless, it's a site where people primarily use it to pay for their sexual fetish or sexual content. So I suspect people were enjoying, we'll put it that way, the idea of her being acting like a puppy. So our society is teaching that, anything you want to do sexually, If you want to do it, it's consensual, it's all good. Well, you know what? Things can be consensual and can still be bad. And if you can't see that, then you are a very shallow thinker. It shouldn't take, we'll go to the affair route. All right, is affair is bad even though you really want to do it? Okay, then things can be consensual and you can really want to put your genitals on something and it can still be bad. So, anyway, I mentioned this because it's I've talked to people who are pretty smart and are very secular in their mindset on these things, and I've pointed these things out to them, and it shuts them up, actually. It actually makes them stop. You can actually confront people on this one, and they're so used to, and we as Christians are probably a bit of cowards and aren't pushing back on it, or maybe we aren't finding a good way to articulate it, but you actually can show people that their thinking on this is, and how I approach it is like, okay, even saying you're true, it's not like embracing your sexual lust is somehow some profound thing to be necessarily celebrated. If sex is a meaningless thing that's just about you having your orgasm, okay, it doesn't make it a good thing to be celebrated. It just makes it a thing. All right, people aren't like, oh yeah, embrace your love of chalupas. That's the highest good. Woo, chalupas. No, it's like, okay, if you want to eat chalupa, eat chalupa. But people put all this weight on it like it's the most important part of their identity. It's the most important thing that you be having orgasms all the time with whatever you want to have an orgasm with. And it's such a petty, shallow way of thinking. And people think it's so profound. Anyway, that's my little rant. So yeah, what else do we have here? Yeah, so my favorite Bible teacher is Mike Winger. You can find him on YouTube. If you're watching this, you probably know who Mike Winger is, because you're gonna find a million videos from him before you find one of mine. But anyway, he had a comment the other day that I thought was pretty interesting. Obviously, homosexuality is a big issue in society these days, and he mentioned, not to take anything away from that being sinful, which is what the Bible teaches. But he pointed out that the church had kind of been picking and choosing what things they react to. That he suggested that in the 90s, and I don't know if this is true, but the 90s there was quite a movement to just start looking the other way with any sort of heterosexual immorality that was happening in the church, that people were just kind of turning their back on it, ignoring it if Christians were hooking up. It stopped becoming an issue worth confronting or addressing to any significant degree, and so he was basically suggesting that we kind of opened the door for it back then, and just the next step was taken after that, and we're being pretty hypocritical on it still to this day, or at least churches there being that way. I know many people are consistent, but anyway, I thought that was some interesting food for thought. Anyway, last note on this verse. I did try to figure out what lusty stallions meant, and I will say one of the more uncomfortable Google searches I have done is looking up lusty stallions, because you're kind of like, oh boy, this could take me some interesting places. Anyway, all right, moving on. First noun, 9, shall not punish them for these things. Again, it's like, I'm looking for any excuse not to. Declares the Lord, shall not avenge myself on a nation such as this. And I think it's interesting that it uses the word avenge. Well, first of all, shall not punish them for these things. So punish is, you'll find some translations rendered as visit them, but visit them has the idea of like punishing them. He's like coming to visit, almost going back to, I guess it was the last video, but we were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, and how Abraham came to visit, God came to visit Abraham, and then visit the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to see if they were as bad as he had heard. I think it's that kind of visit of, it's time for judgment coming. Probably that was, I would say this entire passage is calling back to that story, because at the beginning it says, find me one person, and we talked about this in the last video, but for those that didn't watch it, here God is saying, hey, find me one person who seeks justice and judgment, justice and truth, and I'll spare it. Spare Jerusalem. Just find me one. And that's a callback to, Abraham saying, if you can just find 10 righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah, will you spare them? And God saying, yes, I will. So anyway, shall not punish them for these things. So, punishment is like, punishment is something where somebody does something wrong and you give them, negative consequence, but it's for the purpose of correcting them. At least that's my understanding of punishment. It's kind of to get them back in line, right? I don't punish my daughters when they act up because I want to see them suffer. I punish them because I want them to act right. Shall not punish them for these things, declares the Lord. Shall I not avenge myself on nations such as this? So I think it's interesting that they use this term avenge, because this is avenge, it's associated with like vengeance, right? And vengeance isn't really the same thing as punishment. Vengeance is, as I understand it, and I didn't look up these terms, and so I take this with a grain of salt to make sure I'm not misrepresenting the scripture here, building too much on too little, but it seems to me that vengeance is when it's a personal thing. When it's like, you've done something to me and now I'm going to do something to you. Not merely to be corrective, although that is an aspect here, but also because you deserve it. Like, I'm going to get my pound of flesh from you. And the Bible says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. We're not supposed to seek for vengeance. We can seek for justice and punishment. And those might end up looking very similar sometimes in terms of the actions, but not the motivations. Vengeance, actually just taking a pound of flesh, that is something for God. At least that's my understanding of things. And God saying, hey, it's not just about punishment, it's about vengeance on some level. I am going to avenge myself on you. Shall I not? And same thing, it's this idea of God is quick to forgive, slow in condemnation, long in mercy. But when that mercy is up and it's switched time for judgment, you better look out. It's coming. So same thing for us. Let's not take that lightly. All right. For the last section, I can't believe how long I've been talking. I'm going to be so tired tomorrow. Hope the baby sleeps in. All right, verses 10 through 13. Go up through her vine rows and destroy, but make not a full end. Strip away her branches, for they are not the Lord's. For the house of Israel and the house of Judah have been utterly treacherous to me, declares the Lord. They have spoken falsely of the Lord. They have said, he will do nothing. No disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. The prophets will become wind. The word is not in them. Thus shall it be done to them. So go up through her vine rows and destroy, but make not a full end. So vine rows, kind of weird term here. This is talking about a vineyard. In vine rows, I didn't really know this, but they have, they're vines, so they need something to grow on. So basically, the vine rows are actually made of like half fences, which, have room for the vines to intertwine with the fences and grow up on them. I don't drink, so I don't, I've never looked into wine. I don't know much about it. Probably most of you know that. But anyway, so that's what it's talking about here, and it's saying, it's using the metaphor of a vineyard, which is, from my understanding, not the first time the Bible has used the metaphor of vineyard. I think Isaiah, which I didn't confirm this, but I believe Isaiah uses a metaphor of a vineyard, and he lived about 100 years prior to Jeremiah. So I believe this is something that's been used before. Jeremiah's probably echoing that. Might be mistaken on that. I know for sure. I know for sure it's used other places, and I know for sure that God uses this, or Jesus uses this, a similar metaphor of I am the vine, you are the branches, that sort of thing. So I didn't have time to look into those and kind of draw out some parallels and meaning that's probably there that could be made, but that's something to look into if you want. Probably could get some more out of this. But in a general way, we said, go up through her vine rows and destroy. So he's saying, my vineyard, my beautiful vineyard that I made, especially of you people, my special people, it's time to destroy it. But it does say, but make not a full end. And we talked about, several times, I think in the last chapter, maybe the first half of the last chapter, we talked a little bit about that, of, how God had promised way back in the Old Testament times, hey, I know you're going to eventually betray me and get away from me, and I will bring judgment, but I'm not going to bring full end to you. He's going to keep a remnant. So it's an important idea that we keep seeing come up over and over again in the book of Jeremiah. There's going to be that remnant there. I'm not going to make a full end to you, but some major destruction is happening. And, actually, did I save some verses on that? I did not seem to save some verses on that. That's weird. I thought I did. Well, whatever. Go up to her vine rows and destroy, but make not a full end. Strip away her branches, for they are not the Lord. So God's saying, you guys are not my people anymore. We're taking it away. This goodness I had for you, I made you a wonderful vineyard, gave you your nutrients, but you were taking it all for granted. You were not using it. We're making an end of this. No more. And you think about that act of, it's basically talking about pruning, I think, from, I'm not a gardener, or don't even care about plants at all, really. But if you have, as I understand it, if you have a section of your plant that's not growing well, if it's taking some nutrients from the main body of the plant, but it's not producing fruit or whatever you want, then you prune it back, right? You take that part off. So that's what God's saying here. It's a harsh metaphor, but he's saying, hey, these branches that aren't, you have become almost entirely unfruitful to me, maybe entirely unfruitful to me, and I'm pruning away, I'm taking this away, because you have to have a trimming back before you can have the regrowth in this case. There's a better place for those nutrients to go. If we're not using what God gave us, which again, take it back to the United States, if you're not using what God gave you, he's going to take away the blessings he gave us. Verse 11, for the house of Israel and the house of Judah have been utterly treacherous to me, declares the Lord. Not much to say there other than, it's talking about both halves of the nation of Israel. There was a civil war, and Israel and Judah had gone their separate ways. Israel had already been carried off to captivity. Judah's still around. And here God's saying they've both been treacherous to me. They've both been traitors, basically what he's saying here. They have spoken falsely of the Lord, and have said, so keep this, catch this, because I actually missed this for some reason. Even up to the time we did small group, I didn't actually catch this until after small group, and I came back to it. What he's saying here is he's about to talk about what the bad people have done in the nation. They have spoken falsely of the Lord and have said, they've been saying stuff that's not true of God. They have said, he will do nothing, no disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. The prophets will become wind, the word is not in them, thus shall it be done to them. So this is the foolish rambling of the stupid people who are denying God in the land. So kind of an interesting translation thing to note in here in verse 12. They have spoken falsely of the Lord and have said, he will do nothing. So a lot of translations will actually go with a more literal rendering of this, which is, it is not he, is kind of what that actually says more literally. They say of God, it is not he, when they hear, and it specifically is talking about like all the prophecies that they're hearing, like that Jeremiah is delivering. They're just saying, it's not God. He's not really going to do that, is the basic idea there. No disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. This reminds me of the words of the serpent in the Garden of Eden that says, you won't die. It's just straight up denying the clear truth of the matter. It's just denying it. And it comes back to, that idea of God's going to judge them. Of course he is. This is the attitude they're having. They straight up flaunt in his face. Again, I said my daughter is having some behavioral issues here recently. She's always been strong-willed. But here recently she's been straight up defiant, which is kind of weird. Pray for her. But she's been a little bit more straight up defiant than usual, where she just says, I don't have to do what you say. And you're like, where did you get this idea? Yes, you do. And that's basically what they're saying here. If they're just straight up denying, we don't have to do that. And this also, this is something that, should I come back to this? No, we'll do it now. He will do nothing. This speaks to me deeply about, my words are slurring a little bit because I'm getting tired. But this speaks to me deeply about the state of our own country, the attitude of our own country. He will do nothing. No disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. Oh, bad things aren't going to happen to our nation. No, they never come to our nation, for sure. We're super good and awesome and have all sorts of great things. I think this is a problem for both conservatives and liberals in this country. I think the liberals have this, which I'm getting mildly political here. I guess, I don't know, this might be moderately political, but I'm already in for a penny, in for a pound. Liberals have this delusion of things, they call themselves progressives, that inevitably things must progress, that things will inevitably get better, and they seem to have this myth of their view of utopia being an inevitability, like society is always advancing, always evolving, always improving. And no, wrong. I mean, obviously, there are some ways in where you can see this trend, but we are at this little pinnacle of freedom and prosperity, and through the blessings of God, and I would say some wisdom from man as well. Not to say that it's been done without God; it absolutely has not. But I do believe one of the ways God blesses people by giving people some wisdom, and giving nation and its leaders some wisdom. But we are on this little teeny tiny, I don't know, island of prosperity. I don't know how to describe it. We're like this. What we have in the United States is this exception to the world. This is not the general state of the world. They do not have this. People do not generally have this much control of their life, much less this much wealth. And it's a very special thing. And it can go away. It absolutely can go away if we make foolish decisions. Or if we get under the condemnation of God, we will not withstand it. And that's the flip side that I see. So I believe progressives have this delusion of things must always get better. And I think conservatives have this delusion of we're America. Nah, it's not going to happen to us. I see this with a lot of people who seem to see, they'll see a lot of problems, and yet they somehow have this weird little, nah, it can't happen to us. And granted, maybe I'm being too fatalistic here. I don't think we're doomed, but I think I do actually think unless revival happens, I do think we're doomed. But to what exactly doomed means, I don't know. But, people who will say, oh yeah, I see a lot of problems here, problems I would agree with, they'll say, oh, but we'll be fine, it's all good. No, I don't think you realize how precarious life is, how precarious our prosperity is. He will do nothing, no disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see the sword or famine. I'm actually going to show something here. So this is the U.S. debt clock. This is simply a website that tracks all the debt information of the United States in a whole bunch of different ways. So if you look over here, and by the way, if you have a moment, I know if you're like me, you often listen to things on YouTube without actually looking at them, but if you do have a second, I would appreciate if you could actually look at the screen. If you look over here, this is our U.S. national debt. That's $28 trillion. If you look out here, this is the official federal spending every year. In reality, it's more than this, but that's almost $7 trillion a year. All right, so if you look over here, this is our federal tax revenue. In other words, how much money we actually earn as a nation a year, well, specifically in tax revenue. So essentially the equivalent of how much the nation has to spend every year. So you might notice a little something weird here. We only earn 3.4 every year, and yet we spend 6.7 every year. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. So I want you to put this down on your level. Let's say you earn $50,000 a year, right? So that would be your income. Now I want you to imagine that every year you spend nearly twice that, $100,000 a year. And in addition to that, you have this much debt, which this would be equivalent to, like, let's see, that would be like 8 times, I believe, if I did the math correctly. Or no, that would be like, yeah, it'd be about 8 to 9 times as much as you normally earn. So if you earn $50,000 a year, it'd be like you have $50,000 a year in earning, you spend $100,000 each year, and you're already roughly $400,000 in debt. So the question is that a problem? Hard thoughts. If you look at this, $85,000, your debt per citizen of the United States, your percentage of the debt is $85,000, right? The amount of money that your share of the government federal debt is $85,000. So if you have a household of 4, for instance, that means you'd have, what, more like $320,000 of debt. All right? If you want to look at that as debt per taxpayer, because there are a lot of people in the United States that don't pay taxes, that's $220,000. So if you're just thinking about what the expense is for you and your wife, that's you'd be over $450,000 at that point. All right, nearly $500,000 that would be your share. And everybody you know who pays taxes owes another $220,000. Is this a problem? It seems like it might be a problem to me. You have all sorts of stats in here. If you look down here, this is what they call unfunded liabilities, and this is a very important category. This is, we've made a bunch of promises, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all these things that we know are going to cost more and more money in the future because the baby boomers are retiring and there are less kids in future generations. And the baby boomer generation is going to take up a lot of money since there's a lot of them. So at this point, and other things we promised to pay as well, but those Social Security programs and Medicare, Medicaid, those are a big part of it. So unfunded liabilities is the amount that we have promised to pay that we know we're going to have to pay in the future, which we know we also have no money to cover whatsoever. We have no way to pay for it. And that is $149 trillion. All right, so let's keep that in mind that that we owe $149 trillion. And let's take it back to the personal budget level. Let's say that we earn $50,000 a year. We spend $100,000 every year. We already owe $200,000 every year. And the amount of stuff that we have promised to pay that we have no way of paying is, and I had to totally go to Google to figure out all these numbers, but is essentially $2.2 million. And we earn $50,000 a year. That's just insane. So you might be saying, this is political. Why are you getting political? That's not what I'm coming to you for. Well, obviously it is political in a certain sense, but it's also Bible. I mean, there are lots of doctrines in the Bible that aren't taught over and over and over again. One thing that does seem to be pretty clearly taught in the Bible is that debt is a bad thing, at least a dangerous thing. Certainly, to be responsible, before you build a house, count the cost. That's very clearly taught by the Bible, right? So, is this not a problem? Are we not being woefully irresponsible here? I don't think this is getting particularly political. What would be more political, which perhaps does deserve discussion, but I'll let go at the moment, is, in what ways we're being irresponsible. But, something that, again, count the cost. If there's a bunch of government programs that you think are wonderful and you would love to have exist, well, do you have any money for them? This is a good question. And by the way, these figures that we're looking at, these don't include your personal debt. These don't include city debt that your city might have. There's a lot of pensions and stuff that have been promised on the more local level. State debt, which all that's being tracked here as well. So again, is this a problem? Are we being responsible? Or are we just hoping that judgment never comes, that the consequences never catch up with us? Anyway, this U.S. debt clock, it has all sorts of breakdowns. I suggest you become familiar with the site. We'll go back to the Bible here. What's it say here? It says, they have spoken falsely of the Lord and have said, he will do nothing. No disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. Let's be responsible here. Let's be realistic about what actually faces our country. They have spoken falsely of the Lord and have said, he will do nothing. So they're talking specifically about the prophets here. No disaster will come upon us, nor shall we see sword or famine. The prophets will become wind, which is kind of a fun way of expressing that idea of it's just hot air, wind bags. The New Living Translation, which I don't really like. It's a pretty loosey-goosey translation, and I prefer a little more closer to word for word. But they translate it as God's prophets are windbags, which is kind of a funny way to say it. But the prophets become wind, like they're empty. The word is not in them, referring to the word of the Lord, presumably. Thus shall it be done to them. So it's those people, all the horrible things they're saying about us, that's coming to them. That's what they think. So I guess I don't really have much more to say about that. So what do we do, big picture in that? I'll repeat what I said in the last section, since that was supposed to be, that was what was going to make my big takeaway for this one before I realized I need to split into two videos. But yeah, big takeaway is, I see a lot of parallels here between our country and what was going on in Judah. And I don't think we're to the point that there's only one righteous person in the entire nation. I don't think we're there, or entire capital. Well, maybe the capital, but yeah, I don't think we're there. But I do think we are in real trouble. And at bare minimum, I think you can see some parallels here. And even if you think I'm too much of a negative Nancy, which is probably fair, maybe fair, let's not be prideful and think that we don't deserve judgment, that it can't come to us, because it absolutely can. It absolutely can. And let's be aware of these parallels and see where they are and in our country, and ask God for mercy, because boy, we need it. We really need mercy, and we really need people that are doing good. And that's the other thing, is that verse 1 start off saying God is looking for a man, or not looking for a man, but find someone who is truly looking for justice, truly looking for truth, and with seemingly with implication being, if he could find just a single one, he would have forestalled judgment. And so if you see disaster upon the horizon in our own country, and you need any encouragement to do good, there it is. I mean, I don't know how God judges exactly, but he might be looking down on our country right now and saying, one person, give me one person doing right, and I'll save judgment for another day. But judgment's coming sooner or later. I mean, he's constantly judging, but I mean, we will not turn away from God and turn away from all of God's principles, like, don't be lustful, which our society totally promotes, or don't spend money you don't have, which our society completely promotes. We're not going to just be able to ignore the things of God and the consequences don't come. Consequences come. So let's do our best to get our hearts right, for the sake of ourselves and our nation too. If you need a little extra encouragement, and maybe just our family, maybe this applies on a smaller scale as well to our local community or group or our church or our family. Maybe God's saying, "Hey, bad stuff's happening, but if I just had one, I could spare." Let's get our hearts right and pray for our country. Anyway, that's the big thing. And I guess I'm about done. And what time is it? It's 12:16. I'm not going to get full sleep. I'm going to be very, very, very sleepy. I hope the kids sleep in. All right, well, bye. I'll catch you on the next time.